CLOG Builder 2.0 Master Classes. This is class 4, which is the fourth in the CLOG work framework tutorials. And as I did in the other classes before, I'd like to mention consider sponsoring CLOG. That's at GitHub, sponsors Robbie Botten. And like I did in the previous classes, I'd like to mention just some of the great works of others that have made CLOG possible. And one of the masters that puts a lot of his work into the public domain for all of us to be able to enjoy, Shinmera. Basically, github.com, Shinmera, and Atomics definitions, and there's actually a number of other smaller frameworks that are used throughout CLOG. And again, just a very, very worthwhile to make the effort to take a look at his work and to sponsor him as well. So in our class today, we're going to cover a few things. First one is the use of the tab key. It's a new feature that we've added to the source editor, which is essentially an Emacs style tab key. We'll talk about that in a moment, and a little bit of changes to the REPL itself. Also, then we're going to look at part 1, infinite composability. We'll talk about the idea of CLOG objects and how they essentially can work together and compose various new objects within themselves, and how you put them all together. This is actually directly connected to tutorial 8, which is the second part that we're going to cover. But I feel that this is an important idea to share and to understand before we look at tutorial 8. That will give us a better understanding overall of what CLOG offers and why things are the way they are as well. And let's get started. Okay, so with part 0, so the tab key. So this is really a neat little feature. Let's go ahead and just open up a source editor. And let's say we're going to write, our nice little piece of code here. Okay, let's go ahead. I don't know, format nil, right? Hello, right? So let's say, for example, I decided I want to move this to the next line. I can hit Enter, hit the Tab key, and it goes ahead and it will automatically line it up appropriately. What's really cool, of course, is to get into more advanced types of situations where you want to, making a bunch of code. Let's say, so for example, we're doing a let, and let's say x test, right? And let's go ahead now and add our code. Let's some sort of thing here. Let's go ahead, format nil. Okay. And let's say X, right? So that's cool, right? And of course, hitting the tab on the actual text, if it was in the wrong place, it will move it to the right place, right? So again, let's say here, let's move it there. Okay, hit tab, boom. There's no matter how far long it goes, but let's say, for example, you know what? I'd like to add something. I'd love to add a loop around this. I don't have to reformat all my code. I can basically start using things like the tab key to go ahead and to realign everything where I want. And in addition to that, I can also take a look at the whole entire file and say just tabs for the entire file. Or I can do, for example, again, let's go ahead here and take out this section like that. And okay, let's go and let's do Lisp. Let's not do, the whole point was to not do the whole file. So let's go ahead and just select that section, then do adjust tabs section, and then we'll go ahead and adjust my tabs. Again, pretty much, when it comes to writing Lisp software, I think without this one particular feature, it becomes very difficult. I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you a secret. Sometimes you're in the middle of putting together this great function. We've got all this great code in, and all of a sudden, okay, behind all this, I've got to add, let's say, a handler case, or I've got to add one small piece of code, and that means, now everything has to be reformatted in order for things to be able to line up. Well, this just becomes a really easy way of doing things. Of course, this is built into Emacs forever. CLOG Builder does have that now, and you can comfortably work through and work on everything you want. Now, it happens to be, if you really don't like this feature, it is on by default, which basically means a tab in the middle of tab doesn't mean tab anymore. It just means, to move things around. If you ever want to go back to a non-Emacs style tabs, then you can go back here, option edit preferences, and almost everything, like I said, that we're building into the into the CLOG builder. I'm trying to add features for everything. So for example, you go ahead and let's see here, key bindings, editor. There you go. Editor-use-tab-as-tabbify, and let's just put true. So you put nil to that, you'll go back to a regular tab. And of course, which still, even with this editor, still will actually, automatically bring you to the same level of tab on the next enter and things like that. But in addition to that, you could still always use the Tabify feature by using Control on a Mac or Alt on a PC and Linux and hitting T, and that will essentially line everything up the way you'd like it to be. Your choice. Your mileage may vary depending on what you're into and like. Okay, let's see here. Next on our list of things to take a quick look at. Okay, all right, is changes to the REPL. Since we're going to be using the REPL today a bit, it's certainly very worthwhile to take a quick look at this. Now, essentially, I've changed a little bit. The REPL automatically gets its own console now, which means there's the debugging ability of CLOG has been extended considerably. In that now that when you run your applications, you can actually all your various different restarts, your console, everything will actually be logged in the builder that you started it from. So you'll actually have very little need or reason to ever go to the actual command line, but it which does exist as a catch-all situation. Of course, like everything, you can of course edit and turn off all the debugging that's done at the CLOG builder side and let it drop down to Emacs if you started it in Slime, or drop down to the command line and then using the REPL that's built into your particular Lisp. So that's no problem either if you don't want to use this, but it is there. So the CLOG REPL console just means that I can go ahead and I can do print hello right here, and again it will go ahead and again print to my local console. In fact, if I open up more than one REPL, all right, I actually now have two consoles. Of course, whichever one you push to, we'll go ahead and we'll bring up the one that we need. Okay, all right. Now, in addition to that, let's go ahead and X this one out. Okay, I've also added down here. So what happens is the REPL still works if you like this style of working, but of course, I like the idea of having a little playground where I can, edit my code and of course have all my drop downs and everything that you have in the editor. So for example, let's go ahead and let's see, do times. Okay, let's see here, n 5000. Okay, and let's go ahead and print. Hello. Okay, and I can go ahead now. If I like that, I can go ahead and click here on this button, and this will send what we just typed in the playground, and boom, of course, it's now, of course, here, affecting our console over there. And like I said, it's just another way of being able to use it. And of course, since the text is still here, I can still modify it, play with. I don't know. I really like this layout the way it is. This actually is not configurable per se, although if there's a demand or ask for it, I will. But I like, again, having all the editing features available to me here and being able to play with certain sections. So let's get rid of the REPL we just had there. And let's actually open a new one. Okay, so let's open up another REPL and let's talk a little bit about this concept of composability and infinite composability. Now, first of all, when we talk about this idea of composability, what we're really talking about is very straightforward. It's something you're all familiar with that have worked with HTML at all. And that's, for example, let's say you have a div, right? And inside that div, I can put other elements, right? So I can put, let's say, a button, right? And then I can have, for example, after the button, let's say I can have an unordered list, right? And so forth and so on. Now, that's that idea that one element then can contain other elements, and this composes now a new element. So this similar idea exists within CLOG, except it takes on a little bit more form. And what I mean by that is not only can you put together a div with a button and various other elements inside of it, these actual components that you've built now, this div now with other things, can actually be built up into complex components or controls, if you want, in the old VB lang, that essentially that exist and can exist on their own. So you can actually build up and compose any sort of new objects based on pieces from other objects. And now this is not going to become immediately useful just yet, and eventually it will as we get further and further on in the idea of making custom controls or custom panels that you'll be able to display on the screen, and you'll be able to reuse them over and over again in different ways. So imagine you have a form, and that form then could be used multiple times. No big deal, right? I mean, this is not rocket science. I'm sure many of you have come up with components like that. But the idea behind CLOG is that this is the thought from the very beginning. But for right now, I'm just going to talk about the elements that make this possible and how you sort of build up a little bit. Later on, we deal with actual panels, which is a more complex type that's built on top of HTML, where that's sort of the intention of being your base element that you'll be building things in terms of components. With this, particularly speaking with CLOG Builder, which essentially gives you an entire GUI editor to make those panels up however you like. But before we get there, let's just talk about the basic idea. So let's go ahead. Let's give us def var, okay, let's create that. Let's go ahead. Let's set up our item here. So setf, okay, and let's go here. Create div. Let's see here. Put on the body. Right. Oh, I forgot. We actually have to go ahead and open up our REPL. CLOG Builder REPL, meaning as opposed to having it be an entire another window, we'll do it, in the actual CLOG REPL GUI, so we can see what's going on here next to us. Okay, and we'll go ahead. Let's give it actually some contents, right? Content. Hello, right? Okay. Good. Okay. So let's go ahead. Let's run that. What happened? Undefined. Okay, once I made made a boo-boo. No problem. Create. Let's see, I should be using my drop-downs more. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now, like I said, now that I have that, let's go ahead. Let's say, again, I want to add an item, right? So what happens is that every create function within CLOG essentially returns back the object when we're done, right? So create a div. That we have a div object that's contained in n, and so now I can go ahead and I can add objects to that div, right? So, but what we do, we need a button, and I don't know. Let's go ahead and create a button. Create button, right? And we're gonna say we want to put on n, right? And we're gonna make that button have a content, right? Let's see here. Hello button, right? And let's run that. And of course, like I said, so what happens is that n, right, which is our div, actually, it's not that one was placed after each other. Actually, hello actually contains, that div that contains both the words hello as a text for the div and also contains this button. Okay, again, this is HTML. This is not rocket science, right? But the concept, though, is that these two now are an individual object. Now, that means, let's say, for example, I want to go ahead and let's see here. Okay, let's give it some color, right? Let's go ahead and let's set the background color, right? Background color, okay, of n, and let's say to orange, right? Orange. My fingers, do what you're supposed to do. Okay, good. Okay, so as you can see, a div, right? A div actually always basically takes up all the place, right? The entire it's a block level HTML. So a hello button is within the block, which is div, and it basically is sitting there. And like I said, the orange is going to encompass everything that's inside of there. Now let's go ahead now. Again, so we have a concept here of this. And the idea is that, this would all be great, but obviously for creating GUIs, it's not particularly all that useful. Well, it is for creating pages, which is what HTML was designed for. When you start moving into the world of graphics and representations, you want to do a little bit more. So for that, you have to understand a little bit about the HTML model, right, of positioning, right? It's actually called position in HTML itself. That's what the name of that particular attribute is. But it's called positioning because position already exists within Common Lisp. So we have to use something a little bit different. So we use the word positioning. And there are 4 different types of positioning that can be done in HTML. Static, in fact, that's what you're looking at here. This is actually called a static positioning, right? Meaning one object is added to the other. So that's a static positioning. And if I add additional, but if let's say, for example, I just add another div, let's say create, let's say div. Again, we're gonna go ahead. Well, let's put it on the body, right? So we're not gonna make it part of n by going ahead and sticking it in n. We're gonna put it next to n. So content, new line. Okay, all right, fine. So this is going to now exist now on a second line, right? Okay, so so it's not contained, but it's actually parallel. They'll have the parent of this div is body, the parent of this div is body, the parent of this button is n, right? Okay. Let's go back to here. So static basically means to say that the items are placed next to each other based on the regular rules of HTML. Then there's 2 or 3 other different types of positioning. One called absolute, one called fixed, and one called relative. So the first let's do is fixed. Fixed basically says that a specific object is going to be fixed in time and space to the browser window. So let's say we take our hello button, our n, and let's go ahead and let's say the positioning now for that item. Let's go ahead, positioning, right? Positioning, okay, of n, and let's change that now to fixed. Now this should be interesting, right? Oop, okay, so let's run that. So that's kind of weird, right? It's now basically, I don't know, interesting. Okay, so fixed. Okay, and where did our other one? Oh, that's what happened was. So first of all, we're changing it fixed. But why didn't it actually attach to the outside? It should have gone right here at the window. Well, maybe because of the position, that maybe the default position. Well, let's find out. Okay, let's have some fun. Let's go ahead now. Okay, and let's do the set geometry. Okay, geometry, and let's basically say the geometry of n. And let's go like this. Let's put the top is 10 and left is 10. Okay. And okay. Boom. Okay. Well, where did that go though? Went someplace. Oh, here it is. You see it right here underneath? Yeah, so let's actually put the top there down a little bit further. Okay, boom. There you go. Now we can see where it is. So fixed basically is fixed to the entire object. What's interesting is, I guess here what happened was when I went ahead and I made it fixed to start with first, what it did was it took its position where it was before originally. I mean the default of the actual location it was when it was created, which was here. So when we then moved it from fixed and gave it an actual location, now it moved here. Now, and then, like I said, that's what's fixed though. So fixed basically means that X and Y, or top and left, or width and height, and all this sort of are all relative to the actual browser window. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one. Now we can get rid of this. Okay. So the next one we're going to look at now is absolute. So positioning properties are relative to the. Oh, let's do that afterwards. Relative. Okay. So relative. Oh, no, actually, absolute. We'll do absolute, right? So position properties relative to the first non-static element in the DOM before the element. Now, happens to be, even though this element is being displayed here, right, it's still in the document object model located before new line, right, and after the CLOG builder REPL GUI window. So it meant it was over here originally. Remember when it was static, that's where it was, right? So that's actually technically still where it is, right? So let's go ahead and let's change the positioning, right? Okay, so let's do this. So setf, positioning again of n, and let's now turn it to absolute. So what should do, if I'm correct, is this should move to around over here. Okay, let's see if I'm right. Okay, absolute. Okay, and run that. Ta-da! Okay, yes, I was right. Okay, so there you go. So now this position is relative to the window. Okay, so what happens is again, so we're over. Okay, so we're in good shape now. Okay, that's absolute. So basically, fixed means is basically relative to everything. Absolute means relative, right? Again, the exact language here is, like I said, positioning properties are relative to where the static position element would be in the normal flow of the document, right? That was we did absolute. We did absolute. So absolute properties are relative to the first non-static element in the DOM before the element. So the first non-static element is the CLOG builder REPL GUI window. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do, all right, and this can we see it that much in this? Maybe a little bit. Okay, so what happens is this makes it relative to this window. Now, originally the static, remember, was there. Let's actually go ahead and let's change that back to static so we can see where it was before, right? Right. In fact, what the actual top and left that I had before, the 110, that all gets erased, or disappears for now because it makes no difference. So when something's static, it follows the rules of HTML, and your size doesn't really make a difference, right? Okay, so let's go here. So let's go ahead and use relative. Let's see what happens, right? So relative. Okay, relative. All right. And let's do this. Oh, so now again. So this really looks very similar, right? But what happens here, first of all, is the static area, this would have been our div, remains where it was. It's as if it lifted out of the page, right? But still here, as if it was still there, lifted out of the page and then moved to a position relative to its originally location. So that's kind of how it worked. And in fact, we can actually move that around a little bit. Let's just do something interesting that actually show us something else with CLOG that we can see. Something that most people won't see much because it's not something you normally do too much. Okay, let's go like this. Let's go ahead and let's create a new object. Okay, let's call it again. Let's do it again to the body because it's going to be a sister or brother element and not a contained within n, which is our div with the button. Okay, content. Okay, and let's say first line. Let's call it. That's going to become first line. And when we first do this, is not going to be the first line. It's going to be, of course, after new line. So now, what happens is like this. This is what's called placed, right? So whenever I create a div, it automatically places the object in the DOM. In this case, the bottom of the DOM, the bottom of the position, right? The bottom of the object model. Or in this case, like I said, with static, there's going to be the bottom static item. Okay, so I actually can change the position where I have the object in the DOM by deciding how I want the object to be located. And I just realized we didn't give ourselves a variable for this one, so that would help a little bit. So let's go ahead and set var def var. Okay, let's call it the okay. And let's go ahead here. This actually is going to create, of course, an additional element. So first line 2, we'll call it. Okay, fine. All right. So now we can play with n and first line 2. Okay. So let's go ahead here, and let's see. So set line. Oh, if you look up the documentation, let's look up the documentation. First of all, let's do this. Let's see. Alt period. That'll go ahead and pull up our system browser. Let's go ahead, create div, right? Let's do this, right? I mean, actually, there's more than one way to skin a cat here. You know, obviously, in all of Lisp is like this. So let's say create div. So I can go ahead and I can select the object, and I could have gone Lisp. Let's see here, describe selection. And then I would go ahead and get, that. I could have done what I just did, which is I use most of the time, I just fly around to sources and take a look because it's just easy enough to get around in Lisp in that way. So notice this, right? So we have a create div, right? And we went ahead and gave it content, but there's a few other things. First of all, by the way, you should know there's a reason why everything is in keywords like this, because first of all, you may not always want to give it content, number one. Number two, is there's a certain regularity to the way that methods are created all the create methods have a certain pattern to them, and that pattern helps with the builder later on. We'll see when we get there. But anyways, the content basically we use, right? Style, that essentially is like the equivalent of the style tag, in the in HTML. And then you have a choice. Well, the object, does it come on the page hidden or shown? In this case, then the second question is, does it have a particular class? Just like you can have specific styles, CSS styles, you can also set a CSS class here, and you can give an HTML ID. Now, the thing is autoplace. That's what I wanted to show you. So everything by default automatically places things, right? It says in the end of an object, the end of the DOM, the object which was created with it. However, there is something more we can do, okay? And that's what I want to show you. So remember, we have our first line too, right? We have our first line object, which should have been. Let's go ahead. Let's set up. First of all, let's move the positioning again one more time. This way we can see it clearly, and then afterwards we can play. Well, no, let's leave it the way it is. Remember that n is supposed to be here, and it was lifted out because we're doing relative, so it's here, right? It's pulled out, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do something interesting. So I'm going to do. So we can go ahead here and let's take this. So you have what's called placing, right? So you can place one object after or before another object, right? Or I could do place inside bottom of or inside top of, right? So for example, when we created the first line, the n, we created it with a default auto place, which meant it placed it inside bottom of the body of, again, this is the body. So it placed it inside of the body. This hello button was placed inside bottom of its parent, which was hello, right? So the default is always inside bottom of. Okay, so I can take the object. Let's go ahead now and let's do something different. Let's go ahead, place inside bottom of, right? Let's say again. So inside bottom of body, right? N. Okay. So what's going to happen now, all right, when we run this, is we went ahead and now we placed hello button here. I remember, don't forget, this is relative. It's not static, right? So I've actually placed. Let's go ahead and change that too. Let's go ahead and let's do setf positioning of n. Let's just say the status, right? What did I just do? Static. Okay. Okay. So this way we can see more. Now I can go ahead. Now I can change this, and let's say inside top of body n, right? And now I can move it, right? So I'm moving everything. In this case, when it comes to placing, we're placing things inside and bottom of, right? In fact, of the DOM itself. So we're actually moving this object around in the DOM. That's why if we went ahead and we changed the positioning, right, to relative, there's movement, but it's going to be relative. Let's say, I'm not going to do this as an experiment. I could do far into this. Okay. Point is, that's one. So also there's another idea is, of course, you can place, right, there's other types of place that we have, place after and before, right? So let's say, for example, now I want to go ahead, place after. In this case, we have E, our object. Let's say place after E, N, right? Let's run that. And what happens is, so now I've now moved hello to after the first line. So obviously you can see that this is like pretty cool because I got to have applications that move stuff around up and down the DOM, all basically just using these place methods that we have. But again, all this, like I said, I'm just trying to give you a perspective of how things sort of work and are relative to each other, okay? Now, so all of this really is great about, again, how objects can be moved around the DOM, how you can choose how things are placed, where they'll be on the DOM. But there is also an idea, of course, that objects that contain each other, for example, like the hello button, right? so they may potentially use up more and more space. Well, what happens if the object is larger than the space available, right? Let's see what happens if let's add another object to so create div. Okay, we're going to place this object right inside of the hello div the end div that we had, right? And contents content. Okay, so let's say 1. Okay, let's see here. 2, 3. So what happens with this, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so since this object is static, right? The fact that I added 1, 2, and 3, right, to that particular div, I just actually expands the div, and it is a block div, so it means it takes the full space, right, of the width of where it is in the DOM and everything else. So now let's go ahead and let's move this out, right? So let's go ahead here and let's do the positioning again. Setf positioning, right, of n, and let's change it again to fixed. Let's move it out of here altogether. All right, boom. Okay, so now the object is here. Now you'll notice, of course, it's no longer full width, and also I think we had 4. We put 4 BRs in there, right? 4 lines in there. Well, that doesn't make a difference. Let's go ahead now. I want to do something else. Let's change the actual height, right? And let's give it a height for n of, let's say 100, right? Okay. So, okay, that's 100. Now, let's say I make this now 25. I want you to see what happens, right? Oh, well, okay, now our height, we don't even have enough room for our hello button, right? Because it's actually not just a thin line, right? In fact, it does go to the end of the hello button because the hello button is a static in terms of the width. So whatever width we add here, it kept adding. But what happens here, though, is these are actually, why aren't they colored orange? What happened here? What happens is they are bleeding over and out of the div, because the div, which is fixed in size right now, and we set its size to a size of 25, and this is actually outside. So basically you have what's called clipping. So the default clipping is just to let things bleed all over the place. So what we can do is we can actually affect the clipping, right? And we can change the way that works. So let's say, for example, here, clip, right? So overflow, let's call overflow. There we go. Okay, overflow of n. Okay, and then the question is, how do we want the overflow to look? Well, let's go here, for example. Let's take a quick look at overflow. I guess there's a lot of overflows in here, so I get a CLOG. Okay, overflow. Okay, so overflow, right? So we have visible, hidden, clip, scroll, and auto, right? That's what we can use. So let's say, for example, this time, let's go ahead and let's do something cool. Let's do overflow, and let's say we're going to put a scroll bar. So here's an automatic way to add a scroll bar, right? And boom. Of course, let's make that a little bigger, right? So let's put the height of, there we go, to, let's say 100. That's still 50 because we still want it small enough so we can have a purpose in that. Okay, run it. Okay, there we go. So here you go. So now basically we have a scroll bar that'll actually let us see as contents, right, on our little clipped out box over here. So again, so you can see this really becomes a very workable tool for building up GUIs. And this is sort of the basis, the idea of that HTML has these abilities, and to just build it into a framework that I use for building, in this case, CLOG GUI. But actually, CLOG itself, it doesn't have to be. We could have done, you can do any kind of custom GUI you want or whatever we want, just using CLOG on a blank page. You know, obviously, this desktop motif just works well for most of the things that I'm working on right now. But I certainly built plenty of apps using CLOG or CLOG's predecessor, Noga, that are just look for the most part like HTML, but have all kinds of dynamic elements that can fly around and do what I want and everything else have you. Actually, along those lines, I talk about flying around. Let's say CLOG power, right? I just give an idea of such a thing. So here you go, demo. Yeah, so here you go. So here's actually there you go. It's like this is running over the internet, and I just made a little animation, that randomly makes it look like it shakes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, all right. Anyways, it was a cool thing. Okay, let's see here. What else I want to cover with this? Z-index, of course, like I said, multiple objects in multiple places. You can set the z-index in it as well, and set geometry. We've already seen me use it a couple times already today. That's just a really quick way to be able. I actually set with, but I can just set multiple things in one shot. So let's see here, set geometry. It's just a really way to choose what I want to do. Okay, so let's say n, and I want to go ahead. Let's give it again. Let's say a width of 100 and a height of let's keep the height. Let's keep it 75. Let's make it a little bigger, right? And, go ahead and run that. What did I do? Oh, I misspelled something. Okay. Height. There we go. Boom. Okay. So there we go. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. So that basically that kind of puts us where I want to be. All right, I think I covered. Okay, so again, we're going to put this now. We're going to make use of all of this in tutorial 8. Okay, and of course, tutorial 8 is also going to bring in mouse, touch, and pointers, divs within divs, and positioning, overflow, lambda. Okay, we'll talk about that as we go. Okay, very good. Okay, so that's it. So there we go. That should wrap up part 1, and let's get to part 2. I know it's a little bit long. I know. I'm for some this may not be super thrilling information, but it's just important to have an idea of how these things work. If you know HTML, obviously this is much simpler to understand. But if you go over this part a couple times, I don't think this is going to be very difficult. Look up overflow, look up z-index, look up the place inside top of, inside bottom of, place before, place after. Look up the creation functions, create div, create button, etc., and see how they're used and how they play together. And that'll kind of put you in the master seat for using CLOG for building any sort of web page or any sort of actual GUI. Now, again, remember, I'm telling you, I'm not saying that any of these are the ideal, perfect ways of doing anything we're working on here. This is about learning how CLOG works. Listen, for the most part, if I had to build up a web page, I'm going to build a web page using tools that any graphic designer would use. And then I'm going to pick a couple of elements, right? And then I'm going to go ahead on those elements. I'm going to say, okay, I will set an ID on a bunch of elements. And then what I would do is I would just serve it out through CLOG, and then I would just take those IDs, attach to them, and then I would just then do whatever I want, manipulate them afterwards, and not necessarily create them in CLOG itself. But you can, and it's certainly usable. And if you're doing a true GUI or something like we do here with the GUI, with the CLOG GUI, with the desktop motif and stuff like that, then I'm for sure going to use it. The point of CLOG is very, very flexible in many, many different ways. Okay, so let's wrap this up and let's start tutorial 8. And okay, let's go. Let's clean up where we are. I'm gonna pause this and clean up, and we'll start again. Okay, so let's get started with part 2. Let's go ahead and open REPL, and let's go ahead and run tutorial 8. Okay. Yep, good. All right, so tutorial 8. This is actually pretty cool. So as you can see, you can use the mouse to go ahead and drag, right, things around. Right, you can use your finger. I'm using a finger now, not that you can see it, right? And if I was, let's see, what else can I do? If I had a mouse point, if I used a pointing device like a pen, that would also work. I have one in my bag someplace, but whatever. But anyways, the idea, of course, is this of course introduces a very different model of things than you're used to normally seeing in HTML. This is also, straightforward HTML actually, but still. Now we're getting closer to what is more like a real GUI. Okay, or for that matter, real programming of a GUI or anything else like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the tutorial 8. Okay, so believe it or not, HTML actually has 3 different APIs, one for touch, one for pointers, and one for mice. The pointer API is supposed to be for everything, but doesn't really quite work out 100%. So we actually have a workaround here to make all 3 work. But let's, like I said, we've already talked about the idea of how objects can be composed of other objects, so that actually helps us out quite a bit here. So let's look at our setup. So on a new window, right? We go ahead and we make a connection. One of the first things we do is, of course, we have a brand new window, and that means we want to make a new instance of our app data. Now, app data in this case is a class, right, that contains drag X, I mean the location of the left side of the box relative to the mouse during a drag. Drag Y, which is the location of the top of the box relative to the mouse during the drag, right? And this, of course, will be for every instance of this tutorial. In theory, for example, let's go ahead and copy this. We can actually run multiple versions, as we know, right? And they will all work simultaneously, either on the same box or run across the network or anything else have you. Okay, so what makes that possible is our global data we always stick into some sort of app data. And this is a convenient way of doing that. So we create a little class that contains our data. I mean, it actually doesn't have to be a class. I mean, you can use structs, you can use whatever you want, and basically stuff it into the connection data item. And we're going to call that data item app data. So there is a item sitting in the connection data and called app data, and that basically just points to an instance of app data. All right. So there we go. So that'll be our quote unquote global stuff. Really, it's just global to the thread. Okay. Okay. So we go ahead we have 3 divs, right? Div 1, 2, and 3. Right, the first one's on the body. That's actually our outer div, the blue one here. Then we have the pink one, which is the second div, and we have the third one is the green div. Okay, and then we have our directions. We go ahead and create and drag the boxes, right? That goes back down here, right? And okay, there we go. So now, let's go and take a look at this. So first of all, what I do is the directions, I go ahead and I set the positioning to absolute, which means that whatever position we're looking is going to be relative to the first non-static item, meaning when the item is a GUI type item, it's going to be relative to that item. So in this case, dir is going to be relative to its parent, which was div 1. And we're going to put it on the bottom, right? And therefore, it's going to show up as we see here on the bottom, so that we put it bottom 0, which means it's going to attach to the bottom. We can't resize this. We haven't built that into anything here, but the actual directions are essentially set to bottom 0, which means it will always be attached. No matter where this goes, this will always be at the 0 from the bottom. In fact, it's actually a pretty cool realization is that bottom is always from the bottom. It's not the position of the bottom, but from the bottom. The same thing when you have from the right or from the left or from the top is really the way you should understand the concept of top, left, up, and down in terms of HTML dimensions. Okay, so let's go ahead. We set the borders of the 3, right? So again, we saw the blue, red, and green. We go ahead and now we give them some fixed widths. 3 to the right, the one's a little smaller than the other. We set our positioning. If we were watching this slowly, we'd actually see that these widths don't mean anything until we actually get to here and set the positioning up. But we've already played with it, so we have an idea about it. So I set the first div. I do the fixed to the window of the entire HTML. Now, by the way, if I actually change this to absolute, it wouldn't have made a difference because the first non-static item is going to be actually the actual body. But nevertheless, the first one is relative to the window. Then the second one is relative to its first parent that's not static, which is div 1. And the same thing goes for div 3, right? And then for overflow, right? So what happened was I didn't want to create, scroll bars and stuff, so we use hidden. So what happens is that when things overflow, they get clipped, right? They're hidden away, right? That's how that works, okay? And there we go. And then we get started. And what I get started with event-wise is if a person touches, right, meaning starts a touch event on div 1, 2, or 3, or starts a mouse or pointer down, meaning a pen or anything, at any of those cases, then that basically begins our whole process, which we'll get to in a moment, of tracking and dealing with the actual movements. Okay. Then let's see here. Then also you'll notice, by the way, all their cancel events, meaning I don't want them to what's called bubbling. There is something called bubbling, which is a fact in HTML where an event hits one item. Any item below it will also get the actual event as well, unless you've canceled the event from bubbling. So cancel event, we say true because we don't, for example, we know that div 1, div 2, and div 3, right, one is contained in the other. So if I click on div 3, I don't want div 1 moving too, I just want div 3 moving. So that's what the cancel events are, right? The pointer event actually has a concept called capturing the mouse or capturing the pens. And we're, of course, going to say, yes, we want that because we want to basically hold and maintain our hold on the mouse wherever you put the mouse, right? Even if the mouse, for example, was to, let's say here, if I went outside the screen, I still want my mouse, right, to still be working, right? So that kind of thing. Okay. All right, and that's the reason for capturing the pointer. Of course, when you're using a finger, well, I mean, it doesn't work that way. If you move your finger out, you're out. That's the end of it. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Let's give it a try. If I move my mouse finger out, finger back, well, that's not so good. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like very funny. I've actually lost my item now. All right, so let's just lost my green box. We'll bring that back like that. Okay. So touch is more sensitive. Okay. Anyway, so we have like I said. So based on the touch of each of the divs or a mouse pointer down on each one of them, we begin our whole process. In this case, we're going to do on mouse down. Right. That's the event as we're going to do it. Now, by the way, interestingly enough, you'll notice here on the touch, I don't actually do anything. I actually go ahead and I capture the touch event, but I actually do nothing. Right? As you'll see here, I mean, that's just a nil. Now, the reason for this is by responding to the touch event, right? I say that I want the touch events, but they actually, HTML automatically translates the touch events into pointer events. If you do not do the touch event, you might want to play with this later and see what kind of anomalies start to show up. But what happens is the touch doesn't get tracked. So then it'll record a touch as a click, but it won't actually maintain a flow of events related to touch. So that's the reason for that. This is a really good hinter and pointer for your future game or whatever else you may be working on, and it's an important aspect of getting it, your app, whatever it is, working on every possible device now and for the future. Okay, so let's get started with some meaty stuff here. Okay, the mouse down event, which is triggered by the pointer down event actually, but we called it on mouse down. And the on mouse down event, basically what we do is we grab the coordinates of the mouse X and Y, but relative to the screen. So we say for the mouse data, we want the screen X and screen Y. If you look in the CLOG documentation, will be all the various different available keys to pull data out for any particular event. In this case, it's the pointer. This will be the pointer event. Then, of course, then we want to go ahead and let's get the position of the object that's been clicked, right? The top and the left of that object. So position top, position left. And by the way, we often use, if you're using them individually, top and left. There are two things. There's position top and there's top. What's the difference? Well, position top gives you a actual numeric value, where the case of top alone could be a string even. HTML is very flexible as to what allows you to stuff into things. But basically, position top will give us a pixel value. So when you're trying to get the top and left of an object, you want to use position top and position left, because those are going to be an actual numeric value they can work with. The actual mouse data is always numeric. So screen X, screen Y is always numeric. So no problem at all. And then we go ahead basically and we take our drag X and drag Y. And we, of course, find out the relative relationship between the mouse X and the objects left, the mouse Y and the objects top, right? Which are going to be in browser coordinates. So drag X, drag Y, that'll get that. And we set the pointer event for on move, or the pointer event for when it's been released. And actually, in truth, I'm going to tell you, it may not matter in this particular application, but there's another, it's called set on pointer cancel. And it's actually quite important because what happens if you something happens, somebody removed their hand from the screen or something along those lines. So that's actually how you would know to cancel the event from beginning to end. The whole thing was just basically, it was an attempt to move but didn't actually happen. But again, so that's on pointer cancel. But we're not really handling that in this particular example. So now move and up, move around and up. We're done tracking our events. So then we go ahead and, well, the person continues to use his mouse, and this, of course, creates mouse move events. And we grab the screen X and Y of the mouse every time. We create a new relative position, and we set the top and left. And again, position top is for getting, top and left is for putting. So we're going to stuff in a pixel value of the Y and the X, and that's going to let us move around. And again, remember, here the OBJ, the object, right? The CLOG object here can come from three different objects. So it doesn't make a difference which one of them began the drag events, and whichever one is the one that's feeding us events, that's the one that's the OBJ is going to represent, right? That's the CLOG object that we're using. That goes back to previous tutorials as well, right? And then again, mouse up, and then of course, well, stop tracking, right? And stop tracking is, of course, my function to go ahead and to stop the move events, stop the pointer up events. And that leaves us back if of waiting for our next event, which theoretically is, again, another touch event or another pointer event, and go from there. Okay, so this only handles, of course, one finger at a time or one pointer event at a time. It could be expanded to handle, multiple pointer events at the same time. That is actually possible because you have multiple touch events. There are various different ways to make that work out. But okay, anyways, whatever the case might be, this is a very straightforward, really cool little example of moving around objects and, getting closer and closer as we move towards a more full understanding of CLOG and how it works. I know this has been a long episode, but I think informative. Hopefully I didn't botch it up too much, and I've got everybody interested, and redo it a couple times if you need to. Just play around with this, and the only way you can ever understand anything in computers is by playing with it. So, if you're the type that doesn't like to play, then you're the type that doesn't like to learn, and you're not going to get anywhere in anything within the computer field. You got to play to make it work. That's the beauty of it. I think that's why I like it. I get to be a kid. All right. I will see you again next episode.